When talking about Helluva Boss, I am fully prepared for a lot of backlash, and for this one, I got it before I had even said anything. That was something I definitely wasn't prepared for. And yeah, I did kinda ask for it. You gotta admire the passion this fandom has for this show. This show is incredibly popular and for very valid reasons. The animation is awesome, the characters are endearing, entertaining and likable, while also being very relatable. As I've said before in my videos, believe it or not, I like this show. I genuinely do. Though I have a funny way of showing it. But as I have also said before, just because you like something doesn't mean you should ignore or be blind to its flaws. And when you are a passionate fan about a thing, when someone says something negative about said thing, it can feel like a personal attack. And because I am a sarcastic arsehole, that can sometimes sound like what I'm doing. And I am always trying to make changes to do better, but I am human and I am going to make mistakes. But at least take the time to hear what I have to say before throwing me under the bus. Just saying. This show is far from perfect, but one thing you can say for Helluva Boss is how bold it is, especially when it comes to representation, and when it comes to portraying characters with disabilities. Well, he's certainly there, isn't he? When it comes to my videos, I prefer not to dive into fan theories and instead look at what the show gives me on its own. I'm an analyst, not a theorist. As fun as theorizing stuff can be, like explaining how or why disabilities are a thing for hellborn creatures, which is a topic I really don't want to dive into here, I want to ask instead, why have we not seen any disabled characters in Helluva Boss until now? And though not everyone who communicates using sign language is actually deaf, because this character might be mute for all we know, and let's not go down the route of, oh, why is a deaf character at a concert when they can't hear anything? Deaf people can enjoy music at a higher level than hearing people can, because deaf people can feel the beat of the music, which gives them a greater connection to it. But until this point, the representation in regards to disabled people within this show has been pretty sugar honey iced tea, especially since it used the R word in the pilot and almost in the show itself. Disability representation lags far behind every other marginalized group. I may not have a physical disability myself, but I do have an adopted sister who is registered blind, and I am also married to a disabled veteran who has hearing issues, as well as a whole list of other invisible disabilities. But I will say now, I don't speak sign language, so I can't comment on how accurate this particular sign language is in the animation, but that's not what this video is about. Amazingly enough, my problem with this scene has nothing to do with the imp's disability or Fizz's disabilities. If anything, my main problem with this scene is that we needed more scenes with the deaf imp before this scene happened. So my problem is more to do with a writing issue rather than a representation issue, but I wanted to make sure that I got my point across in regards to talking about the fact that this show had ASL within the show. That is something that should be admired. And we definitely need to see more of this representation in not just animated shows but in live action shows as well. And yet deaf representation hasn't really been a thing in animation all that often, other than in Craig of the Creek, Bluey, The Dragon Prince, The Little Mermaid TV series, Madagascar, A Little Wild. I could go on. What I'm saying is that Helluva Boss wasn't the first cartoon ever to depict a deaf character in an animated show. And yeah, there probably are more shows and movies that depict deaf characters in animation than I have listed, but it's still a pretty rare thing to see. So to see a deaf character be portrayed in this series is actually something special and incredibly wholesome. At least it would have been if this wasn't depicting a hellborn imp having a disability, something we have never seen until this episode, telling Fizzaroli, who is essentially a sex symbol in this world, that he wants to be a clown just like him when he grows up. This in itself is problematic, but not something I feel like I am qualified to discuss since I'm asexual, so yeah. Why is this scene so problematic to me? Yeah, I know it took 4 minutes to get to the actual subject of the video. These scripts are difficult to write, sue me. Well, I feel like it's because this character, who is a child, is the first disabled character we see in this show, and according to the fan wiki, this character doesn't even have a name. At least not until Vivziepop was asked during a panel in the fall of 2023 what this character's name was, and she thought up a name on the spot and called him Oliver.
What was the name of the little boy in the episode who did the silent
Why is this a problem? Because the character and the disability was not only written into this episode simply to further develop Fizz's character instead of actually showing representation of a marginalized community, but that said character wasn't even given a name, so it's unlikely we will ever see this character again, which means this character isn't a reoccurring character, which tells me they weren't really trying to represent a marginalized group of people, in my opinion. They just wanted to have a character boost the main character's, or the main character in this episode anyways, story. Because let's face it, Blitz has been relegated to supporting character in his own show at this point. I'm so tempted to refer to this as the Tiny Tim trope, but even Tiny Tim himself wasn't just invented to further Scrooge's development. He played an integral part to the story, as well as not just Scrooge himself, but also Cratchit as well. Little Red doesn't have any connection to any other character depicted in this episode whatsoever. He's there and then gone. You don't even see him interact with other members of the audience. I mean, a little more screen time with Little Red isn't too much to ask for, is it? Especially if we're going to have such a wholesome moment later on. It would have been nice if we spent more time with the guy before this moment happens. 13 minutes in, for example, we have a scene of imps and hellhounds paying Mammon to meet Fizz and the twins. It would have been a perfect scene to show Little Red here, right? Show him trying to meet Fizz but can't because he's being shoved to the side, or he missed his chance because he's deaf and didn't hear his cue, or people are talking to him but because he's signing they might not understand him because they don't know sign language, so therefore gets ignored even more. And because there are so many people around, Fizz doesn't see him and is not in the right frame of mind to interact with fans right now. Or maybe even have the creepy fan get in Little Red's way, showing both sides of how fans can be. Innocent admiration next to toxic obsession, showing the best and worst type of fan famous people can have. Maybe this was the intention here with these two. I just feel like Little Red deserved just as much screen time as the creepy fan had. Okay, so we made the guy when Fizz and Blitz are teenagers, so Little Red probably wasn't even born at this point yet. But showing once again a fan who had been festering in the background waiting for his moment to pounce, while also showing a new fan, young and naive, trying to be noticed while being drowned out by the crowd. It would have been a nice juxtaposition there. If we saw Little Red struggle to get to the front and then we learn he was deaf, it would have made this moment here far more impactful, because we would have been invested in the character before we learn he's deaf, and then we learn that Fizz can speak sign language, which brings up a whole bunch of questions as to how or why he knows sign language. And again, this will be diving into fan theory territory, which I want to veer away from. Fizz has to cope with incredibly intense public scrutiny as represented by this one creepy fan, living up to the expectations of others. Might they be the ones you love, or your boss, or your fans, becomes a vicious cycle, and Fizz feels like he always needs to be in performance mode, always in costume, always nice to everyone in spite of how entitled or demeaning a fan may be. So when he finally gets to interact with Little Red, we see him come out of performance mode momentarily. Fame is a fickle thing. People crave fame because they either want power, status, or wealth. Fizz, to me, wants fame because he wants to be accepted. No one wants to be a nobody or powerless and without fame. Fizz feels like he is exactly that as a result of how damaged he is after the accident in the fire caused him to lose his limbs and his horns. The lure of adoration is intoxicating and incredibly attractive, and Fizz has never really known how to live without fame. As the attention becomes overwhelming for Fizz, the expectations of mistrust or familial concerns come to the fore, and Fizz resolves to accept the threatening, phenomenal aspects of it. Fizz accepts the creepy, thirsty fans that come with the territory and convinces himself and Ozzy and Blitz that he can handle it. But seeing Little Red made him remember that not all his fans are like this, and by telling Little Red that he can do anything he wanted after Little Red tells him he wants to be a clown just like him, Fizz was also saying this to himself. He can do anything. He doesn't have to be this clown. He doesn't have to work for Mammon. And later thanks Little Red on stage for helping him get the courage to quit being Mammon's puppet. Fizz has an initial desire to become successful, but he also has a lot of personal confusion and a loss of ownership over his own life. It depersonalizes him, making him into a literal doll. He suffers a loss of personal freedom, and people can see that vulnerability and might confuse it for elitism or rejection. Do fans like Fizz for who he is or because of what he does? Most fans don't really care, as represented by the creepy fan, but there's a small percentage that genuinely do, and those are represented by Little Red. Could this scene have been handled better? Well, at least the lead up to it could have been handled better for sure, but Little Red deserved so much better than this. But was this episode a step in the right direction when it comes to representation of disabled characters? Well, considering both Little Red and Fizz are technically disabled, I would say yes. I just wish Little Red wasn't invented purely for this reason and was a recurring character. But we can't have everything, can we? I'm Mad Munchkin. Stay creative.